Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges Podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am with a very special guest. Her name is Ruth Fearnow. Ruth is a therapist, author, and speaker. Her first book, Therapeutic Mindfulness, is a synthesis of her decades-long meditation practice and her work healing trauma and mental distress. As a licensed mental health counselor and certified eye movement desensitization and reprocessing practitioner, she has identified and embedded the factors necessary for healing into therapeutic mindfulness, which is a skill to facilitate one's healing journey. Ruth's private journey began as a young woman when she found herself studying Kung Fu and Qigong in Shaolin, China, the home of the famous Shaolin Temple. She lived there and began a serious meditation practice. While this skill takes years to develop, this was her first big step to understanding mindfulness practices. She evolved into a trauma therapist, which has enabled her to integrate age-old wisdom with trauma-informed insight. As a result, she has developed healing philosophies and the process of therapeutic mindfulness, which she practices personally and teaches her clientele, many of whom use it on their own. Therapeutic mindfulness has now been adopted for professional use by colleagues in the mental health field. When not working or spreading the word of therapeutic mindfulness, Ruth enjoys singing, community theater, and time with her wonderful family. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Yes, of course. Thank you for being here. And so, Ruth, I just want to ask, just to get to know you a little better, what are 3 things that you are most passionate about and why?
Well, so one thing that I feel like going chronological, I'm passionate about growth. And that's my growth, other people's growth, spiritual growth, healing. Ever since living on my own, I've considered myself a wisdom chaser. And so I've always been, trying to find out what people know and trying to better myself. And I don't know if that sounds exhausting to people or hard, but, growing, you have to go through stuff to grow, but it's always worth it. So growth would be one thing. And then, and just watching the journey, watching what it does for people's lives, it's inspiring for me. That's why when I see people with trauma, I know some people think, oh, how can you listen to that all day? That's got to be so hard and heavy. And the moment someone tells me their trauma, they're starting to face it. And the worse the trauma is, the more inspiring it is that's what they're facing down. It's amazing to me. And the fact that I know how to help most of the people makes it not overwhelming. So I'm definitely passionate about growth. And that's why I am now passionate about spreading the word of what I've learned in this book. Second thing I'm passionate about really would be my family. Relationships. That means so much. It means more than about everything in life. All the growth, what it brought to me, other than helping to try to make the world happy and myself happier, it shows up in relationships. And when I'm challenged, it shows up in relationships. That's what's real. But the most fulfilling part of life shows up in relationships. And then I think those are my 2 main passions, really. Other things could be just fun, but maybe I'll say for a really good, goofy time, I like to do community theater. I'm a ham. So speaking in front of people was not a really big leap, you could say. But maybe if I do a mini category, I'll say the third thing would be spreading this message, because it's under the umbrella of growth. But therapeutic mindfulness is different than what most people are learning. I feel like there's a lot of wonderful tools out there in growth and self-help and mental health and what we're being taught. And I feel like there's a gaping hole, and that this fills that hole. So I am passionate about getting the word out for this.
Wow, I really love that. And I also resonate with a lot of the things that you said, especially about growth and community and relationships, because you're right, the two go hand in hand. It's like as you're growing, you are developing those close relationships and that support system to help you grow even more. And I really appreciate like your passion for helping people through their trauma because it like you're right. It's like when they're sharing their trauma with you, it's like they are coming to the realization that, okay, this is something that I do need to face and that I do need to heal through. And it's so important to be able to process that with the mental health professional. So I appreciate all the work that you do for trauma
Thank
healing.
you.
Yes, of course. So I wanted to know a little bit more about like why did you want to become a trauma therapist?
Hmm. Well, funny thing, the best way I can kind of answer that, because it's not really a why, there's not a logical answer. That answer was given to me. It was given to me by a power bigger than myself. I knew it when I was in 6th grade. I knew that I wanted, at that time, I didn't know the word therapist, so I wanted to be a psychologist. And in my mind, that was doing therapy with people. And then I grew up and I was getting ready to go to college. I was, in the late teens. And I remembered that I thought that. And my attitude was hardly, I'm not going to do that. Like, get real close to feelings, uncomfortable, not into it, don't know what I was thinking. So I actually went into information technology instead. I worked in computers for 17 years. And for years in my 20s, I kept addressing what I called my existential crisis. Why do I exist? What am I here for? What means something? Computers, I enjoyed the field. It's interesting. The technical stuff is like doing puzzles for a living. So that's cool, but it's not meaningful. I wouldn't care if I was living in a hunter-gatherer, culture or a different, like, I don't need a computer. Like, it's not important. What's really important? And it wasn't that. So I would spend many hours on the phone with my dad, actually trying to piece it out. And I would look at majors and do I want to be a chemist? Do I want to be an engineer? What do I want to do? And then it's almost like, I don't even remember what happened, but I remember I was 26. And at some point it hit me. I'm supposed to be a therapist. And once it was given to me again, and I must have been ready to hear it finally, I felt it, like I knew. So there's no logic behind it. I just knew it was handed to me. And actually, it's only just hitting me right now that I was 25 when I had my first realization that I had an intuition inside me that was always right. And then I need to actually try and listen to that. I wasn't calling it Holy Spirit or higher self or anything. I called it intuition at the time. And so I'm like, I need to follow that because I can look back and realize it's always been right. So it hits me when I'm 26. And there was never a waver of doubt from that conviction. And whenever I followed what's inside me, it's always taken me where I need to go. It's taken me places I couldn't have imagined that I would have wanted to go. But that's how so I knew. And once I remembered that I knew, then I did.
Wow. Wow, I appreciate that so much. I just really love the honesty of the journey because it's like at first you've always had the passion, but it was a matter of like redirecting yourself back to that passion. And I just love like the discovery of like, oh, like I felt this deep down like a while ago, but now it's resurfacing and I'm reignited with that passion again. And I just really love that even though you were working in IT for like, like a while, you still were able to like redirect and say, you know what, this is my fulfillment. This is my passion. And I'm not afraid to pursue that. Yeah.
And remember, the reason why I didn't pursue it the first time was I was afraid. Right. I was afraid to go there. I was afraid to be up close and personal to people's vulnerabilities. That felt very uncomfortable, very scary. I didn't have a belief or an understanding about how people heal, whether people can heal. I remember one of the things I needed to learn in my search for wisdom in my early 20s. I was reading some books, and I remember them giving me conviction or hope that healing actually is possible. But I needed that first. And there are other things. So I think that I needed some growth. And then when I was ready, it just came back to me. So I had to overcome some of my own fear, honestly.
Yeah, wow. And that is so inspiring to just be like, you know what? I am scared of this and I feel a little anxious about it because let's be real, like being a trauma therapist, that is like some next level like work because it's just like
Well, I don't know why I went straight to trauma. I mean, go big or go home, I guess.
I know, right? Because I'm like, wow, I do appreciate like all the work that you and other trauma therapists do because it's just to be faced with other people's trauma and then having to deal with the vicarious trauma that comes with hearing all of those stories and like those experiences. And it's just like remarkable that you were able to just be like, you know what, I'm going to help people heal through this. And that is the main drive for doing this. So I love that.
Thanks. And there's just something, some people are very, very weighed down by the woes of the world. And
Mm-hmm.
part of this had to do with my philosophical way of seeing the world, how that grew, my spiritual growth, all these things. Because one, if I didn't believe healing were possible, if I was just going to sit with someone and weep with them while they have a hellish life, I
Right.
couldn't maintain that. That would be vicarious trauma. And then if I didn't have concepts about the purpose of this or concepts about just all of it, if I didn't have concepts that enabled me to have boundaries. So if I see somebody going through something very, very heavy, you know, believing and seeing healing happen gives me hope. And I'm not weighed down so much by it because life is not a big tragedy. And once I can help them relieve some of the emotion, they will start to experience that life is not a big tragedy and it doesn't have to be experienced that way. Either we need to be able to be happy at the same time that the world sucks,
Mm.
right? We have to be, in spite of that, we have to have something else to hold on to. If we don't find that, then we will be either become cold and be part of the world being terrible, or we will be weighed
Mm.
down by it and we'll be crushed.
Yeah.
But there are better ways. And so I think finding what I believe and how I see the world and how I see trials and understanding that healing can happen takes a lot of it off me. And honestly, if you believe that healing has happened, something that happens within the other person, and I am just a guide, I have tools, I'm a guide, I'm a companion, but I can't walk for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then I don't have to have all the answers either. And, like I said, that intuition, that guidance, I have that. And so there's so much of it that's not on me. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
No,
so
for sure.
luckily I've been able to learn and have those tools. So I walk beside, and I listen for guidance, and then it's opened up what I've been able to do and what I've been able to share with people. So I know it's heavy for a lot of people, but it's not as heavy for me. And when you see someone go from a place of trauma to a place of being happier than they've ever been, it's so inspiring. It's so, and it drives me forward.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I love that. And that's also part of the reason why I wanted to start my podcast too, is to be
Mm.
able to like give people hope in the midst of like dark times. Because like you said, if you allow like the burden and the weight of the world and the weight of the circumstances to just like overtake you, that brings you into a state of hopelessness. And it's very difficult. It's not impossible to get out of that pit, but it's like more difficult to get out of it because you're already so sunken deep into it, you know? And I just appreciate the level of like hope and guidance that you do give into other people's healing journey. And it's just like so inspiring.
Well, I love even the name of your podcast. It stands out, Rough Edges. Like, you're not starting with rainbows and unicorns. You're like, there's some rough edges here, y'all.
Yes, absolutely. I really love like the idea of just like therapeutic mindfulness. Can you kind of walk me through like what is therapeutic mindfulness and like how is it helpful for healing?
Oh, goody. My favorite. The whole thing with Shaolin and being a Shaolin a decade before I ever became a therapist. When I was there, I started really actively working on a meditation practice and trying to understand it. And it did not happen overnight. In fact, it still can be like sometimes it's bewildering and sometimes it's amazing. But I started that practice and I did a lot of that on my own. Um, when I came back, I continued a daily practice and I was really trying to figure it out. And then I explored other tools. So I've been doing that for a decade. And then, I graduate and I become a therapist. In my internship, I had done, by that time, plenty of not just meditations, but guided visualizations and all these other things so much that I didn't need scripts. I understood a lot of that. And so I would help people through grief or through other things. Even as an intern, I had that skill set. And the supervisor at my internship said that we should be teaching some of these grounding tools or mindfulness tools to help people emotionally regulate the chaos within. And so I did that. And people that have always had chaos and have never used any mindfulness tools, when they use one, or when I say I guide them to a visualization, they're on the beach. When I do that, they are so many times just amazed at the peace that they can feel, that their mind can get quiet, that they can feel peace. And it's so powerful. And then what I learned as I, developed my therapy chops, my skill set, and I watched this, I started to realize that people will use mindfulness tools as a way to avoid feeling bad. So if they've always had chaos and then I teach them, I take them to the beach or whatever safe place they like. So I might say, okay, I'll get them in a quiet place and in their head. And I'll say, okay, visualize the waves coming in, hear them crashing, feel the sun on your skin, feel the breeze on your cheek, hear the seagulls, all these beach things, and get them really smell the scent of the ocean, the salty air. And they get really deep into that. And it feels so peaceful. And then they go out into life. And that had felt so good that it seems like the answer. So they go out into life and something happens and they have anxiety. And the first thing they do is, okay, feel the beach, sun on my skin, hear the waves, and now it's becoming a thing where they're pushing away negative emotions. And when you push away negative emotions, especially if there's something deep, something that needs to express or be healed, they wait. They don't go away. They don't go off to the side. They don't go into the ether. They wait for you. And if you keep doing it, they stack up and they stack up until you're suffocating. And if you're really persistent in pushing them down, they start exploding out sideways. Panic attacks, rage attacks, phobias, nightmares, flashbacks. That's what you have when you have too much suppression. And so all the mindfulness techniques have wonderful things about them. I'm really into brain training. I teach this stuff. And yet, if you do it to the exclusion of feeling anything negative, then long term, it ends up being a suppression technique. And that's why my book is called Therapeutic Mindfulness, a healing skill, not a coping skill, because we want to go past coping and we want to actually heal that stuff. If you deny it, what you resist persists, what you push down will push back. And we don't want that. So there has to be working both sides. The positive skills, all the positive psychology stuff is fine. In fact, it's wonderful. But you also need to look at the negative. You need to do both. And the reason why people don't do the negative is they don't know how. So my book, in my opinion, is filling that gap. That's not something a lot of people talk about. Some people say feel your feelings, but they can't tell you how to do it without going into a depression spiral. Yeah. Because your brain will latch on to that and go for hours, days, weeks, months. So how do you do that? And that's what therapeutic mindfulness is about.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I am enlightened right now, like just hearing all of that. Like that was just so like that was like very informative. And I also loved what you said about suppression. Like it's so true. Like if you just try to use it to avoid like all of like your more negative emotions, like as you said, like just the sadness, the anger, the fear, the anxiety, it's like those emotions are valid and they're real and you need to feel them, and the more that you suppress it is the worse off it's going to get. And it's just like so interesting to me because I've also had my own journey with suppression, and that's kind of how I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, because I was just suppressing everything. I'm like, oh, if I felt this, I'm just gonna push it to the side and deal with it later and keep it pushing, until my body was literally like, no, you have to feel these, and
Oh,
you're gonna
wow.
go into mania right now because you're not feeling it, you're just suppressing it. And so, yeah, that was like a really extreme version of like what
Yeah.
suppression can do. But yeah, so I just found it very interesting about what you said. It's like what you resist persists. I love that. So I'm gonna use
Mhm.
that. I'm gonna I'm gonna take it.
Please do. No,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. There's so many examples of it. I don't know if you ever heard that one song. The first sentence is so golden, so wise. You may have heard, "Time, time ain't never healed a thing." Like, man,
Yeah.
no, really. I've had someone tell me a memory from 50 years ago and cry in my office that day. I've had
Mm,
someone tell me, my grandfather died, we were so close and he died 14 years ago.
mm,
Why is it still painful? Why aren't I over it yet? And I'm like, why
yeah.
would you be over it? You haven't felt a thing. It it will wait. Your pain will wait. Time
Yeah.
heals nothing. It's what you do in the time that has a shot of healing something.
Woo.
So,
Yes. Yes.
whew.
Perfect. That is amazing. I'm getting some therapy here. Like y'all are getting therapy for free. So thank you so much for that.
Sure, sure.
So I kind of want to like transition. I know you spoke a little bit about your book already, but I just wanted to know like how does your book, which is called Therapeutic Mindfulness, a healing skill, not a coping skill, which is like genius by the way. How does
Thank
it
you.
like how does it break the stigma like surrounding trauma healing?
Ooh, that's a question I haven't been asked before. Breaking the stigma happens in chapter 9, self-compassion. There's an entire and there's different places. First, I mean, it just gives education and share some basic things in the beginning. Here's the principles, here's how the mind deals with emotion. It's universal. It's everybody. I haven't met anyone ever that doesn't have this. I have this. My clients are like, "Oh, you're enlightened." I'm like, "No, not till next Tuesday." But they're like, they're amazing. I'm like, I promise, cross my heart, all the dumb things that our brain does when it's riled up, mine does the same stuff. The difference is I don't buy it. I know how. I have the discipline to pause. I have more tools to go in there, and it doesn't even always heal instantly. But I'm just, I just have a tool set, and I have less triggers because I've done a lot of work. But it's not
Mhm.
because I don't have all the same things. I do. So I talk about how the brain works. That's a very common way to reduce the stigma is education. And then
Yes.
there's a whole lot of talk about self-compassion. Because when I talk about the fundamentals of healing and what I've learned, I can sum that up in a phrase. Judgment blocks healing. Self-compassion nurtures healing.
Mm,
That's the fundamental. That's the building blocks. And so, I discuss how things work. I discuss the process of therapeutic mindfulness. I do some troubleshooting. And then I say, okay, well, let me back up a little bit. Mindfulness is non-judgmental, focused attention. You have two
mhm.
aspects to this. So the focused attention, because our brain can get us off track and get us into a judgment spiral or a story, as Brene Brown would say, can do that. There's all kinds of tricks that it has. So we don't do therapeutic mindfulness in the brain. We do it in the body. it has, so as part of the process, it has some, what I call body focusing questions to get you focused on where the feelings are showing up in your body. Okay. And you may relate to this. Like if I ask, when you get anxious, where does that show up in your body?
Usually in my chest. My chest gets tight.
Okay, tightness in the chest, a very common one. I've had people visualize a rib cage around it, or a caving in, or a metal plate, or sometimes a lot of heaviness, or squeezing in the heart. So yes, tightness in the chest is a really big one. So the emotions are actually in your body and they're expressed in your body, and subconsciously that's happening. So when we get out of our logic, out of our story and into our body, we get that focused attention on where it hurts, literally, as well as spiritually, emotionally, however you want to conceptualize that. So we get that focused attention, but now what we need is non-judgment. And so I've got a series of allowing phrases that I use to help with non-judgment. By the way, I have all these as handouts, and those are freebies on my website. So anyone can take a look at those. But these non-judgmental phrases help prompt us not to judge the process. Because the moment, like the problem with using the beach to deal with feelings is the moment you tell that feeling you're unacceptable, you need to go away, you're judging it. And you are therefore no longer mindful. You are distracting, right? So when you have a negative feeling and you go into it and you focus on it, then I have non-judgmental phrases. Let the feeling be there. Let yourself be uncomfortable. Allow it. Give it space. And it's just this brainstorm of phrases that I use with clients in sessions to help them let go of the judgment mindset. Now, there are people that don't have a paradigm around which not to judge themselves. One thing that happens to us when we're feeling bad is, oh my gosh, I'm being so stupid. I should be over this now. Why can't I just do the thing I'm supposed to do? Why do I have to react this way? And that's really difficult, but it's as if we believe we turned 18 and we should be perfectly logical and not have any emotions that overpower us because we're adults and we have logic. And you can't fix deep set emotions with logic. It doesn't work. You need an emotional solution to emotional problems because it's a different place in your mind. So what I do with the self-compassion chapter, this very long answer, but how do I help shift the paradigm and reduce the stigma is I discuss a mindset that has to do with looking at the fact that you have pain. So, and anybody that is a very nurturing parent or has seen what a very nurturing parent looks like will recognize this mindset. It's just about applying it to our pain. So if you feel anxious and there is a tightness in your chest, once I get you really focus on that by asking the body focusing questions, then I suggest that you look at that as a hurt part of you. And you can talk separately to the hurt part. It's like when you meditate, you have the observer watching what happens. We're watching the hurt part. And the hurt part, you treat it like a child that's hurt. So if a child wakes up from a nightmare and they are shaking and they're crying, we don't say, well, you're awake now. This is stupid. Why are you crying? Or we don't say, tell me what happened first. I'm not going to nurture you and hug you, but if you tell me what happened and it's bad enough and you can justify why you're upset, then I will nurture you and be sweet. Like that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah,
what do? We see the emotion, we see they're shaking and crying, and we become very present with all our attention, and we stay with them until it calms down slowly and surely. And then when the emotion has calmed down, we might learn why, or they might not need to tell us why, but we give our caring to the little one that's hurting. And that's the mindset that I suggest we use for our own hurts. Having logic, oh, this is stupid. Why should I be afraid? Clearly, logically, nothing's wrong here, is not kind.
Right.
And, actually, also, it's kind of funny. I talk about you can't solve an emotional problem with logic. When people tell me, oh, this is so stupid. I don't know it. I don't know why I feel this way. I can't stand it. I don't know why I can't just, it's not logical. Right. And I tell them, you're right. It's not logical. it's emotional.
Right.
So we need to deal with the emotion. And to do that is showing up without judgment and saying, I see you. I see that you're hurt, to the feeling. I see that you're hurt. I know this is hard for you, but you don't have to do it alone. And we
Right.
stay with it. And when we do, the feeling, the physical sensation of the feeling starts to shift and change and move and dissipate and
Mm.
calm. And then it heals and it's not a distraction, because when we're done, I have people check back with the thing that upset them, and it will be less. It actually heals inside your mind.
Wow.
So I think I answered a lot more than that one question, but hopefully that was coherent.
No, that was excellent. I just really love like just how you just described like the feeling as a child, because it's just so interesting about self-compassion. It's like another layer of it is like talking to yourself as how you would talk to somebody that you care about. Because, like, if someone that you care about came to you and was like, oh, I'm feeling very sad, I'm feeling very anxious about this, like, what should I do? You wouldn't tell your friend or your loved one like, "Oh, stop being stupid or irrational." Like you're
Right.
feeling anxious like for what? You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't say that to your friend. Like I should hope you would say that to your friend. But like I just really love like just visualizing it as if, that feeling is like a child, because yeah, with the child it's like if they're scared, if they're hurting, it's like you want to comfort them and you want to make sure that they're okay. Like you don't even ask like, "Oh, what's going on? What happened?" It's like, "Come here, let me give you a hug. Like everything's going to
Yes.
be
Let me
okay."
hold you while you cry. Yes. That's
Yes.
what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the reason why we don't do that for ourselves, like it's almost like the default strategy is, if if it seems dumb and illogical, we can be nasty and kind of bully it so it goes away. Like, you're being stupid, just suck it up, buttercup. And we beat ourselves up because we think then if we do that, then I'll go away. Or if we beat ourselves up enough to where we act right and do what we're supposed to do, if we shame ourselves into it, then we'll do the right things. We won't have problems anymore. Then we get to be happy.
Mm,
So look at that strategy. If we're mean enough to ourselves, we get to be happy. That's the
mm,
strategy of our brain.
yeah.
And so going in another way, and I know like this is one of those things that I can talk to you about, describe all night, give you stories, but the real way to understand it is to experience it. And I share a lot of the stories in the book so you can see what's going on, what's normal, what it seems like, how it shows up for people. But when you get into the body and you start talking to that feeling, and you can have your calm, logical self, but you're going to show up in a nurturing way to the part of you that's hurt, the part of you that's showing up erratically, emotionally, what have you.
Mm,
It just, there's such a healing effect, and it's subconscious. We, again, you can't heal an emotional problem with a logical solution, but when we go into the emotion, it shifts and changes and heals. And that is the result. And it is something like deep in our mind. If we can get out of judgment, we actually have what we need to heal. And that's the amazing part. So as
yes.
you can see, I'm really, I'm really passionate about getting that out there, because this can go a long way for people.
Yes.
And there are people that still, need plenty therapy, and people that have a lot of trauma and need help. But there are some people that don't need me anymore because I've taught them this.
Mm, wow. It's like something that can be learned and something that can be experienced, like as you said earlier, like this type of healing is possible. It's just that we have to allow ourselves to feel nurtured, to feel comforted, and to say to that feeling, like, hey, I acknowledge that you exist and that you're valid, and I'm gonna feel this and it's gonna be okay. Like, that's what we need to say to ourselves. And honestly, I'm guilty of it too. It's like I just want to
We all
bully
are.
myself into like healing through it. And it's just like, that's not even healing. It's just like, okay, I'm gonna beat this thing down into the ground until I don't feel it anymore,
Yeah.
because it's scary and because it's confusing and because I want to shy away from it and not really acknowledge it head on. Like, I just want to get rid of it. So I attack instead of inviting it and
Yes.
actually like feeling through it, you know? So that is really good. Revolutionary, actually.
Thank you. Well, if it helps, therapists do the same thing. I've done workshops where I did a demonstration with a therapist. That story's in my book as well. And she was in a situation where she was triggered at work when she had to function and be professional, but she didn't know about going back and, tackling it this way, but it's just something that kept coming up. So I did it with her. And the first time, so I have her focus on her body and do all the things. And then the feeling only goes down a teeny bit. And I honestly expected it to move more for her. So, but I was kind of on to what was happening. I asked if she was trying to make it feel better. And she says, yeah, because she knows ultimately the goal is to feel better. So she's like, okay, here, the feeling came up. That's fine. Now, come on, get better. And I suggested to her, instead of making it feel better, I want you to let all of it come up. Invite it to get as big as it needs to be. Because for us really to feel like we're nurtured, we can't feel like we're unacceptable. The bad feeling can't feel like, okay, I acknowledge you, but now go into your little box because that's too much. Our mind is not dumb. It feels the rejection. It knows it's cut off. It knows it's not heard. So I asked her, can you allow it to come up all the way? Invite it to get big and uncomfortable. So this feeling was hot for her, and it grew from her chest to her entire chest, going down toward where her stomach is and up her throat, where she even felt like it was suffocating. And then it started to slowly shrink, and I saw a shift in her face. And then I asked her, what are you noticing? And it was starting to come down, and we did it longer. And it ended up going all the way down to the size of a pencil in her chest. We have very vivid, sometimes, ways that we can see or sense the feeling. But it was so hot and uncomfortable and big. And then the heat went away and it shrunk. And it was just a little pencil. And that whole process was 14 minutes. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah. So therapists also, we have the default mind that says, all right, we have to adult time. I looked at you for a second. Let's put it away. It's very natural, the tendency to avoid. It's like emotions are like a hot stove. When you touch it, we jerk back. And even when you've been practicing this a long time, for me, I can still jerk back. Like I've been doing this on myself for over a year and through some really tough stuff. And yet when I would go into something new, there would still be just a little bit of, this is uncomfortable. Yeah. And I had to tell myself verbally the words that I say to clients, let it be there. Let it be all the way there. And I would give myself the phrases. So I had to do that myself to allow the discomfort and to stop kind of bracing against it. So it's very natural, very normal. Unless someone is enlightened, probably universal, I believe. It's just how the mind works.
Yeah. Wow. That is just so powerful and so profound. So thank you so much for sharing that. I have one final question for you.
Okay.
So what are like some words of advice or encouragement that you have for someone who is struggling to manage trauma?
If they're struggling to manage trauma, this may sound cliche, but go to a therapist. Find a trauma-informed therapist. Other words of encouragement would be, you're allowed to shop around. You're allowed to pick your therapist. You're allowed to fire your therapist. It has to be the right match for you. If your intuition, your guidance ever tells you this doesn't feel quite right, listen. You have more wisdom than you realize. Find the right one and then go with that. So really that's the best thing, because even in my book, I give a warning about this process. There are, like, if you're able to tolerate some of your own emotion, then it is likely you can do this on your own. If you cannot, and I actually, in the warning, I list some common dissociative symptoms. Dissociation is when your brain will actually, or your mind will actually exit your body in one form or another to avoid. And that level of avoidance needs extra help and needs an informed therapist to help you work through it. It's when you can face some of your emotions that you can start doing this work. So if you're struggling with trauma, really find the right therapist for you, find that fit, and then start working on it. And if I can answer a question you didn't ask, for everyone else, if you're not, struggling to that degree, and a therapist might still be very helpful, but if you want to know just how to get started or general words of advice, I would say try it. That may sound obvious, but I can't tell you how many times I'll do education with someone and they're like, yeah, they're into it. And it's profound. It's hitting me. I see you. I understand it. And then when we actually do it, they're like, oh my God, you cannot replace experience.
Yeah.
So try it. You don't even have to buy the book. RuthFearnow.com. I have the downloads. They are there. You can try it, but there are some people be able to look at that and start right away and try it. And that would be great. And if you can't, or if it's somewhat of a struggle, go into the book, then you can go ahead and do that. Get more information. The book talks about examples. It gives education. There's troubleshooting tips. There's a discussion on self-compassion. There's a discussion on resistance, avoidance. There's a discussion on filling the tank and positive psychology. So there's a lot of extra stuff in that book, but the basic information on how to do this is free and on my website.
Thank you so much for that, Ruth. And thank you for the wonderful discussion. I enjoyed that.
Thank you. I so appreciate you having me on and helping me spread the word. I think it's so important, and it's actually something different than a lot of what's out there. So I'm excited for it to grow, and I'm grateful for you for being a part of that.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And everyone, I will link all of Ruth's resources in the description of this episode so you can get more information and really try this out. I'm going to try this out. So y'all should do it too. And everyone, stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to another episode of Rough Edges Podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more exciting updates on the podcast, follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast. You can also visit the official podcast website at www.roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.